How to master skills for the TOEFL iBT Listening Advanced. Actual test. Listening section directions. This section measures your ability to understand conversations and lectures in English. The listening section is divided into two separately timed parts. In each part, you will listen to one conversation and two lectures. You will hear each conversation or lecture only one time. After each conversation and lecture, you will answer questions about it. The questions typically ask about the main idea and supporting details. Some questions ask about a speaker's purpose or attitude. Answer the questions based on what is stated or implied by the speakers. You may take notes while you listen. You may use your notes to help you answer the questions. Your notes will not be scored. If you need to change the volume while you listen, click on the volume icon at the top of the screen. For some questions, you will see this icon. This means that you will hear, but not see part of the question. Some of the questions have special directions. These directions appear in a gray box on the screen. Most questions are worth 1 point. If a question is worth more than 1 point, it will have special directions that indicate how many points you can receive. You must answer each question. After you answer, click on Next. Then click on OK to confirm your answer and go on to the next question. After you click on OK, you cannot return to previous questions. Now the test begins. Test 1. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a school official. Excuse me, you work for the school, right?
That's right. Can I help you with something? Looking for a classroom?
No. I need to get a lab key so I can get into the lab to finish up an assignment for my chemistry lab. Can you help me out with that?
What happened? Did you, lose yours?
No, not exactly. I just need to get in there for 15 minutes tops to finish this assignment.
Well, I'm going to need to see both your student ID and your registration card for the chemistry lab before I can issue you a new lab key. Do you have those with you?
Sure, here's my student ID.
Okay, and the registration card for the lab?
I don't have that one with me.
Well, I'm not authorized to issue you a new lab key until I have proof that you are officially enrolled in the class. Why don't you just go get your registration card, bring it back to the lab office, and then we'll be able to issue you a new lab key.
Well, that's the thing. I'm not officially enrolled in the class yet. Not yet, but I will be soon. The professor has already said that he's going to allow me to take the class even though it is full.
Like I said, I can't issue you a lab key without proof. If I did and something happened in the lab or something was stolen, I would be responsible for it, and it could possibly cost me my job. Understand me? I need that registration card.
I see. The thing is, I'm on the waiting list for the class. I'll be officially enrolled in the class next week at the end of Draw Bad Week. It's just that I can't attend until that happens. In the meantime, I'm trying to get a head start on the lab work. The professor gave me a syllabus already, so I'm, trying to keep up with the first week's assignments, lectures, and homework. I just need to get into the lab to clarify some calculations, and then I'll be out of there.
Look, I sympathize with your situation, but you aren't listening to me very well. I'll lose my job if I give you that key.
I know. I don't want to jeopardize your job or anything like that. I'm just trying to figure out how I can get in there for a little while.
Listen, do you have any friends in the class? Do you know anyone else with a lab key?
Sure, my girlfriend is in the class. Why?
Newsflash, borrow your girlfriend's key.
Can I do that? I mean, it sounds kind of sketchy. They wouldn't bust me for false representation or anything like that.
Not at all. They rarely check anybody once they're in the lab, and plus, if anything should happen, I wouldn't be responsible for it.
Hey, that's a great idea. I should have thought of that in the first place. My girlfriend is over lying out on Landis Green. I'll just run over there and get it from her and come back and take care of business.
No problem. I'm glad I was able to help you out. I was in a similar situation back in my day, and unfortunately I was unable to get into a lab, and it really affected my lab grade. It was my fault because I waited until the last minute. Anyways, I'm rambling. Glad that I could, help. Good luck.
Thanks. I'll see you later. Hey, wait.
Yeah?
What time does the lab close up? It's already 4. And it'll take me at least 30 minutes to run over and get my girlfriend's lab key. Will I have enough time?
Oh, no worries about that. The lab is open from 6 a.m. until 1 a.m., 365 days a year, holidays included. If you needed to get something done on Christmas Eve, we'd be open. Until 1, that is. We're the only lab on campus that does that. Not the physics, astronomy, or biology labs. Those guys even close up on the weekends. Can you believe that?
Sure. Well, thanks again. I've got to run. See you. 1. What problem does this student have? 2. Why is the school official worried? 3. According to the school official, what does the student need in order to get a lab key? 4. What can be inferred about the student? 5. Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
Listen, do you have any friends in the class? Do you know anyone else with a lab key?
Sure, my girlfriend is in the class. Why?
Newsflash.
What is implied when the school official says this?
Newsflash.
Listen to part of a lecture in an art class.
If you could please sit down, I'd like to start today's lecture now. Let's see. Right. On the methods of auditioning performing artists. Okay, what's an audition, you may ask? Well, an audition is a sample performance by an actor, singer, musician, dancer, or other performing artist. It is used in the casting process to demonstrate the level and range of a performer's talent and functions as let's put it this way, a job interview for the performing arts. A typical audition involves the performer displaying his talent through a previously memorized and rehearsed solo piece. One example would be a monologue used for actors. Generally speaking, for actors, the audition piece is typically not from the show being considered. For example, an actor wishing to be cast in, let's say, Hamlet, would not likely do a monologue from that play. However, most performers do have a range of audition pieces and select something appropriate. For instance, an actor auditioning for Hamlet would have a dramatic Shakespearean monologue ready and not perform a monologue from an Oscar-wild comedy or a contemporary playwright. But for the most part, the most important method of auditioning an actor is through the use of the monologue. A monologue is a speech made by one person speaking his or her thoughts aloud or directly addressing a reader, audience, or character. It is a common feature in drama. Monologues are also a feature of opera, recital, or other sung section may carry out a function similar to that of spoken monologues in the theatre. Also, comic monologues have become a standard element of entertainment routines on stage and television. Everyone got this? Good. Well, there's more to this than just doing a monologue. Some auditions involved cold reading or performing from a script that the actor is not familiar with. Sight reading is a much-needed requirement in drama, where it's often used in conjunction with improvisations to gauge a performer's ability to perform new works. It is particularly useful during auditions. A good drama sight reader is able to communicate with fluency and clarity and to project speech rhythms and rhymes well. He or she should also be able to bring out the intent, mood, and characterization of a piece through appropriate articulation and body language. Why do actors have to go through all of this anyways, you may ask? Well, in the performing arts, casting is a vital pre-production process for selecting a cast of actors, dancers, singers, models, and other talent for a live or recorded performance. It typically involves a series of auditions before a casting panel composed of individuals such as the producer, director, and choreographer. In the early stages of the process, candidate performers often may present prepared audition pieces such as monologues or songs. Later stages may involve groups of candidates attempting material from the work under consideration in various combinations. The casting panel considers both the talent of the individual actors and the chemistry of their combination. Depending on the prestige of the role, casting calls may go out to the public at large. which is typically done for community theatre. In the production of film and television, a similar process is followed. However, especially for major productions, the process of selecting candidates for sometimes hundreds of parts and possibly thousands of extras may often require specialised staff. While the last word remains with the people in artistic and production charge, a casting director may be in charge of most of the daily work involved in this recruiting process during pre-production. In addition, the casting director may also remain as a liaison between the director, actors, and their agents once the parts have been cast.
6. What is the main topic of the lecture? 7. What does the professor discuss sight reading? 8. What does the professor say the audition is similar to? 9. According to the professor, what is a common practice in auditions? 10. What can be inferred about auditions? 11. According to the lecture, which of the following are important factors in the later stages of the audition? Check the correct answers in the box below. Listen to part of a lecture in an ecology class. Well, if you are all ready, I'd like to continue our discussion on pollution, focusing in particular on water pollution for this class. We can begin by defining water pollution as a large set of negative effects upon water bodies like lakes, rivers, oceans, and groundwater caused by human activity.
You mean all water pollution is caused by man? That's news to me.
Well, no. Although natural phenomena such as volcanoes, storms, and earthquakes also cause major changes in water quality and the ecological status of water, these are not deemed pollution. Nature has a way of taking care of its own problems. But it's much more difficult for Mother Nature to take care of man-made problems. So let's just stick with man-made water pollution for this class.
Okay, can you tell us one of the worst man-made pollutants?
Well, water pollution has many causes and characteristics. Let's begin with organic waste introduced into the water system by man. These wastes include sewage and farm waste, which put high oxygen demands on the receiving water reservoir like a river. This leads to oxygen depletion or loss of oxygen within the river system, with potentially severe impacts on the whole ecosystem.
What about industry? I thought they were the worst polluters of all.
You bet. Industries discharge a variety of pollutants in their wastewater, including heavy metals, organic toxins, oils, nutrients, and solids. Discharges can also have thermal effects, especially those from power stations, and these too reduce the available oxygen within the system.
So we have industry and organic waste put into the water system by man. Are there any other causes of water pollution?
Sure. Silt-bearing runoff, or dirt if you like, from many activities, including construction sites, forestry, and farms, can stop the penetration of sunlight through water. This restricts photosynthesis and causes the blanketing of lake or river beds, which in turn damages the ecology. And if that isn't enough, pollutants in water include a wide spectrum of chemicals, pathogens, and physical chemistry or sensory changes. Many of the chemical substances are toxic or even carcinogenic. Pathogens can obviously produce some waterborne diseases in either human or animal hosts.
Gee, it sounds like what you're saying is that our water systems are in pretty big trouble.
Absolutely. What's worse is that water pollution is now a serious global problem. It's been suggested that it is the leading worldwide cause of death and disease, and that it accounts for the deaths of more than, get this, 14,000 people daily.
Really? I had no idea it was that bad. I mean, that's scary.
Well, it is scary. Let's look at it this way. Most water pollutants are eventually carried by the rivers into the oceans. In some areas of the world, the influence can be traced hundreds of miles from the mouth of a river by studies using hydrology transport models.
They can do that?
Gee, where have you been? Sure they can. Advanced computer models have been used in many locations worldwide to examine the effect of pollutants in aquatic systems. For example, filter feeding species such as crayfish have also been used to study the effects of pollution in the New York Bight. In this study, the highest toxin loads were not directly on the mouth of the Hudson River, but 60 miles south, since several days are required for incorporation into planktonic tissue. Further south were areas of oxygen depletion caused by chemicals using up oxygen and by algae blooms caused by excess nutrients from algal cell death and decomposition.
So what you're saying is the loss of oxygen in the water system has negative effects on all living water creatures?
You've got it. It's a vicious cycle. Fish and shellfish kills were reported because toxins climb the food chain after small fish consume copepods like crayfish. Then large fish eat smaller fish and, well, you get the point. Each step up the food chain concentrates certain toxins like heavy metals and DDT by approximately a factor of 10. Well, are there any questions? 12. What does the professor mainly discuss? 13. What is the professor's tone during the lecture? 14. How does the professor describe the worldwide pollution situation? 15. Why does the professor talk about pollution's effect on fish? 16. What is the student's general reaction to the professor's lecture? 17. According to the lecture, which of the following are some of the most important contributing factors that cause thermal pollution? Check the correct answers in the box below. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a professor.
Excuse me, Professor. You said you wanted to speak to me after class?
Yes, please come in. Do you have a few minutes?
Sure, I'm done with classes for today. I hope there's nothing wrong.
Oh, no, nothing like that.
Wow, that's a huge relief. Ever since you said you wanted to see me in your office, I've been sweating over what exactly it could be.
Oh, my dear, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to cause you any anxiety. I just wanted to discuss your first draft of the writing assignment with you one-on-one. I tried to do this with each student early in the semester to give you all tips on your writing, constructive criticism, I guess you could say. So don't feel singled out. Everyone will be in here with me at one point, just like you.
Oh, I see. Well, I feel much better now. I almost didn't even show up. Anyways.
Good. Now let's see if we can find your assignment somewhere in this pigsty of mine. Masquerading as a lit professor's office.
Well, it looks a lot like my dorm room, actually. It seems we are kindred spirits of messiness.
That's funny. I think I remember a similar kind of humor in your writing, which was very fresh and free. Where is that? Ah, here it is. Well, first of all, I want you to know that I enjoy reading your work. It has an effortless quality to it, and you definitely have a way with words. The way you combine images is stunning at times.
Thank you so much, Professor. That means a lot to me, especially coming from you.
Now, what I like to have students do is a kind of self-criticism of their work. What would you describe as the weakest part of your short story?
Let me think for a minute. I'd probably have to say that the weakest part of this story is how I characterize, how I develop the main character, Jude. I had a hard time giving him his own voice and making him a believable character.
Well, I'm going to have to agree with you on that one.
Really?
Yes, I thought that Jude wasn't as complete as you could have made him. And I think what you do is tell the reader what kind of person he is instead of showing the reader.
I think I know what you mean. I spend a lot of time describing him, and I think I overdid it a bit.
Exactly. It is okay to describe a character to a certain degree, but you must leave room for the characters to develop and grow, as well as allow the reader to make their own mental image of them. That's what makes literature a creative field, on both the writer and reader's side. It is a dual process.
I see.
Now, don't get me wrong. I like Jude. I think he is a very interesting and unique character. I just think you need to have him talk less and say more if you understand what I mean. A technique you could use is the internal monologue, Write what he is thinking, which can give the reader a different portal into his character and personality.
Yeah, I think I get it, Professor. Describe his actions, and what Jude says will help make him a more fully rounded character. Is that it? Am I on the right track?
You sure are. Don't try to force your characters. Try to allow them to evolve somewhat on their own. You don't need to spoon-feed the reader. They are more often very intelligent and intuitive, so allow them to be so. They like that.
That's great advice, Professor. I'll definitely do that in my next draft.
Great!
Is there anything else, Professor? Anything else I need to be aware of?
Well, along with the character development, I think you need to understand the importance of editing your own work. Don't be afraid to cut out lines, paragraphs, and even entire pages if they don't work or fit your story or are just plain bad writing.
Okay.
Many young writers have this idea that once a word is on a page, it is etched there for eternity. That's not the case at all. Writing is a mutable process, ever in flux, always changing and mutating.
Okay, I see what you mean. Less is more, right?
Well, it depends, but in general, I would have to agree with that until you develop your own distinct voice. Many people consider Faulkner to be too wordy or complex and think that it undermines the quality of his work, while others consider his style his genius. Just try to remember that every word should contribute to the story as a whole, and if it doesn't, you might want to consider taking it out, okay?
I've got it, Professor. Thank you so much. If there isn't anything else, I'd like to get back to my dorm and start revising this story while it's fresh in my mind.
Sure, that's all I wanted to talk to you about, and keep up the good work.
Okay, Professor. I'll see you in class.
18. What are the speakers mainly discussing? 19. Why is the student anxious about speaking to the professor? 20. According to the professor, that will help the student the most. 21. What is the professor's opinion of the student's ability? 22. What does the professor explain as a common flaw of her students? 'Listen to part of a lecture in an archaeology class.
Okay, for this morning's lecture, I have some pretty technical stuff to discuss, so I will try to give this to you as simply as possible. I will allow voice recorders for this as well, so, well, ready or not, here we go. You probably have all seen or read news stories about fascinating ancient artifacts. For example, at an archaeological dig, a wooden tool is unearthed and the archaeologist finds it to be 5,000 years old. A child mummy is found high in the Andes, and the archaeologist says the child lived more than 2,000 years ago. With this in mind, you may be asking yourself, how do scientists know how old an object or human remains are? First, let me go through a process which will help us understand how we can date old objects. Well, the fact is that all plants and animals on Earth are made principally of carbon. How is this possible? Well, carbon goes through many living things because it's part of the cycle of life. Let's start at the beginning of this cycle. During the period of a plant's life, the plant is taking in carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, which is how the plant makes energy and grows. Animals eat plants and some eat other animals in the food chain. Carbon follows this pathway through the food chain on Earth so that all living things are using carbon, which is building their bodies until they die. Does everyone follow me so far? Great. Moving on then, a tiny part of the carbon on Earth is called carbon-14 or radiocarbon. It is called radiocarbon because it is radioactive. This means that its atomic structure is not stable and there is an uneasy relationship between the particles in the nucleus of the atom itself. Eventually, a particle is emitted from the carbon-14 atom and the carbon-14 disappears. Most of the carbon on Earth exists in a slightly different atomic form, although it is, chemically speaking, identical to all carbon. How are we doing up to this point? So far, so good? Excellent. Now that we know carbon atoms follow many living things through the food chain, I can now explain how carbon-14 dating works. In the 1940s, scientists succeeded in finding out how long it takes for radiocarbon to disappear or decay from a sample of carbon from a dead plant or animal. A scientist named Willard Libby first measured the half-life of radiocarbon. Now, here's an important definition, so write this down. The half-life refers to the amount of time it takes for half the radiocarbon in a sample of bone or shell or any carbon sample to disappear. Well, Libby found that it took 5,568 years for half the radiocarbon to decay. After twice that time, or about 11,000 years, another half of that remaining amount will have disappeared. After another 5,568 years, again, another half will have disappeared. You can work out so that after about 50,000 years of time, all the radiocarbon will have gone. Libby figured out that the radiocarbon dating is not able to date anything older than 70,000 years old. Since carbon is very common on Earth, there are a lot of different types of material which can be dated by scientists. For example, Libby tested the new radiocarbon method on carbon samples from prehistoric Egypt whose age was known. A sample of acacia wood from the tomb of Pharaoh Zoser was dated, for example. Zoser lived during the 3rd dynasty in Egypt. Libby figured that since the half-life of carbon-14 was 5,568 years, they should obtain a radiocarbon amount of about 50% of that, which was found in living wood because Zoser's death was about 5,000 years ago. The results they obtained indicated this was the case. Many other radiocarbon dates were conducted on samples of wood of known age. Again, the results were good. In 1949, Libby and his team published their results. So, as you can see, radiocarbon dating is a very important field of science. The carbon-14 method has been and continues to be applied and used in many different fields, including hydrology, atmospheric science, oceanography, geology, paleoclimatology, archaeology, and biomedicine. Phew. Now that I'm finished, are there any questions?
23. What is the main topic of the lecture? 24. What is a half-life? 25. What resulted from Libby's discovery? 26. What can be inferred about the professor's attitude during the lecture? 27. How does the professor organize the lecture? 28. Why is carbon so helpful in the dating process? Listen to part of a lecture in a dramatics class.
So, what are we going to learn about today, Professor?
Well, today we will learn about the history of American theater. So, if you're all ready, I'll begin. Excuse me, yes, you. Are you in this class? Then take a hike. Then maybe I can get this lecture started. Okay, if you're ready. Taken from a historical context, the birth of professional theater in America is usually thought to have begun with the Lewis Holland troupe, which arrived in Williamsburg, Virginia in 1752.
It started that far back?
Of course. How do you think the early settlers entertained themselves? Gee. Anyways, there was a drawback to this form of entertainment because throughout the 18th century, there was widespread opposition to theatrical performances. For example, in the puritanical climate of the time, especially in the North, the theater was considered a highway to hell. Laws forbidding the performing of plays were passed in Massachusetts in 1750 and in Rhode Island in 1761, and they were banned in most states during the American Revolutionary War at the urging of the Continental Congress.
Certainly, you are kidding.
Certainly I am not. Anyways, by the early 19th century, theater became more common in the United States, and many celebrity actors from Europe toured the United States. The Walnut Theater is the oldest, continuously operating theater in America, located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was built in 1809.
You mean Philadelphia was the only city in America with a theater at that time?
Oh no, but most cities only had a single theater. Productions were much more rudimentary then, and sometimes plays would be staged in barns or dining rooms where no theater was available. Provincial theaters frequently lacked heat and even minimal props and scenery. Kind of basic, really. Anyways, as the westward expansion of the country progressed, some entrepreneurs staged floating theaters on boats, which would travel from town to town. Eventually, towns grew to the size that they could afford long runs of a production, and in 1841, a single play was shown in New York City for an unprecedented 3 weeks.
What kind of plays did they perform?
Well, Shakespeare was the most commonly performed playwright, along with other European authors. American plays of the period were mostly melodramas, often weaving in local themes or characters, such as the heroic but ill-fated Indian. The most enduring melodrama of this period was, you guessed it, Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Other than the kinds of plays you already mentioned, did they do anything else?
Sure, a popular form of theater during this time was the minstrel show, arguably the first uniquely American style of performance. These shows featured white actors dressed in blackface and playing up racial stereotypes. Another type of performance was the burlesque show. Burlesque became a popular form of entertainment in the middle of the 19th century, originally a form of farce in which females in male roles mocked the politics and culture of the day. Burlesque was condemned by opinion makers for its sexuality and outspokenness. The form was hounded off the legitimate stage and found itself relegated to saloons and barrooms.
Well, how did the modern theater come about in America?
By the 1880s, theaters on Broadway in New York City and along 42nd Street took on a flavor of their own, giving rise to new stage forms such as the Broadway musical. These were strongly influenced by the feelings of immigrants coming to New York with great hopes and ambition, many of whom went into the theater. New York became the organizing center for theater throughout the U.S.
So we can say Broadway was the most influential part of what we call modern American theater?
Well, that's partly correct, but there are other important factors that have influenced the modern theater in America. For example, vaudeville was common in the late 19th and early 20th centuries and is notable for heavily influencing early film, radio, and television productions. This was born from an earlier American practice of having singers and novelty acts perform between acts in a standard play. Anyways, that about covers it.
29. What does the professor mainly cover in the lecture? 30. What can be inferred when the professor says, take a hike? 31. What is the initial general attitude of the students? 32. What does the professor mean by rudimentary theaters? 33. What was a minstrel show? 34. What can be inferred about burlesque shows?